what this means is that we're going to get some relief. We're not getting complete relief from tariffs. So when you think about it, just before Trump, over the weekend, on Saturday, first on Friday, he said he was going to exercise his ability to enforce Section 122 of the 1974 Tariff Code, and you can go up to about 15%. So on Friday, he announced 10% immediately, or actually it was in 3 days, and then Saturday said immediately 15%. So really what that means is you're going to get about a 25% savings from the tariff rates that these apparel retailers were paying just prior to this news that came out on Saturday. And so we estimate that the savings could be anywhere from 20 to 50 basis points, maybe a little more than that. And many of these apparel companies have been putting in mitigation measures. And of course, the number one being, well, first of all, diversifying away from China, so they have a lot less exposure there. And then also their suppliers absorbing, let's say, about half of the tariff impact. And then, of course, price increases, and that's being passed on to the consumer, and it's done very selectively. And so that's why the savings, the net savings, is going to be somewhere around 20 to 50 basis points. And just to give you an example, what companies have disclosed is on an annual basis, they were looking for a net tariff impact, again, net of these mitigation measures, to be somewhere in that sort of 100 to 200 basis points, in that range.
So I guess it's interesting here because some of these retailers have, in fact, been right kind of in the crosshairs of the tariff debate. Have any of the companies that you cover, they talked about whether they would even think about getting tariff rebates, if that's a possibility?
Paul, that's a really good question. I can't imagine that a rebate process could actually go into effect. It would be a nightmare to try to go back and recover these funds. It just seems, I don't know. I think it's too complex. I think we just have to let whatever tariffs were already enforced and the funds received. I certainly hope that doesn't happen, because that could turn out to be a very expensive nightmare trying to recover those funds. And then the idea would be, well, should it go back to the consumer once, if companies were to recover it? So
yeah, it's very complex. So given that, we've had, roughly a year of these tariffs. Is there kind of a ballpark that you've arrived at, or the companies have just disclosed, about how much they took into their margin versus maybe how much the importer took into its margin, the consumer took into its margin there?
Yeah, it's complex to say specifically, but I think what we were trying to allude to earlier, that 100 to 200 basis points, is what these companies are effectively taking in on an annual basis based on commentary from the third quarter earnings call. So they might have gotten hit more or less depending on the retailer that we're talking about and goods that were sourced during various times, right? Because if you had some retailers that sourced fall and winter during that time when China had a tariff that was well over 100%, then that merchandise and their margin was affected very much so, because they had already taken delivery of that product. So it depends on the retailer. And then you have a couple of retailers, for example, Aritzia and Ralph Lauren. Both of those companies have been posting margin increases all year. And so they've been able to benefit from strong sales. What that means is that they're able to leverage fixed costs and get incremental benefits there, and also pass on price increases. And so even though they've been negatively impacted by tariffs, you're not seeing that net effect. Whereas most of the other retailers, you have seen margins dented, and they've disclosed every quarter what the tariff impact has been, net of mitigation measures, and also they'll provide sort of the gross impact. So like I said, I would say the net 100 to 200 basis points. Think about Gap, Abercrombie. Gap's at the lower level. They said annual impact about 100 to 110 basis points. Abercrombie and Fitch about 170. And American Eagle, they were sort of harder, 200 to 225 basis points.